I want to hit. Now, got it, not leave meeting.
That would be too funny twice. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, Arushi,
Okay,
floor is
so
yours.
we will jump right into it. And so the first story, we really want to kind of base it around who is Susan. So we describe you as a multi-talented leader and a wellness advocate. So in this one, can you tell us a little bit about what your journey was, where you to how to where you got today, where you want to be tomorrow? You spoke about having allies and sponsors earlier in your career who provided you with really great opportunities to grow, and you took those opportunities and you had your voice heard, and now you kind of use that voice to strive for inclusion. You're welcoming. So kind of tell us about this journey, the vision, the purpose, how you got here, and just the entire story.
So, as you know, I'm a physician, and I remember the time when I decided to become a physician. It was a long time ago, and I didn't have any role models, none on television, none in the family or in my community. I didn't know any African American physicians at the time, but I knew it was what I wanted to do. I did well in school, in high school, and college, and went to medical school, and I was really happy to have been accepted in medical school. Medical school was the first time I started to feel that working hard and having a vision and a dream wasn't enough. And it wasn't enough because you really can't do it by yourself. You need support. You need a network of people. You need others rooting for you. You need doors to be open for you that you don't even know you need to step into, people who've already been along the journey. So, so it was quite challenging. As you can imagine, medical school is challenging anyway. But to be one of only 5 African American students, and we were the only diversity other than gender in medical school out of a class of somewhere between 160 and 180.
Wow.
To be the only ones really stood out, not before we got there, but once we were there, in how you were treated, how that support, the doors that you needed to open for you in order to help you, show you, guide you, provide tips, just were not there. They were not there for us. So we had to be our support to each other. Unfortunately, not everyone made it through. Of course, not everyone in the entire class made it through. But it was impressed upon me that part of the reason not everyone in our group made it through was it had a lot to do with the need to expend that extra energy just trying to fit in, expending that extra energy just trying to prove yourself. I think some people will call it double jeopardy, but you have to work twice as hard to get half as far, or something like that. That's how you felt. So made it through medical school, lost friends along the way, had a residency program that I enjoyed, became a physician, and I was happy in that role, very happy. Changed jobs a couple of times, not because I was unsatisfied with the jobs, but because I moved from one geographic area to another, got married, etc. And then the position, the role that I had in the 27 years of my practice really gave me an opportunity to see what it's like when people are rooting for you, when people are in your corner, when you do have that support, when you do have those allies. And I say that only because I was a frontline physician. I was not looking to do or be more than that. I was satisfied in that role in my life. And I was tapped on the shoulder to do this or to do that, or to be a part of this or to be a part of that. Not because of who I was, but because of what I contributed at the time, not because of how I looked, but because I was more solutions oriented and had more of a growth mindset. And someone said, you know, you can take those strengths and you can really help us move the ball, move the agenda. As a result of that, you know, I moved through the organization. I moved up in the organization. I went on to get my master's. I became one of the executive leaders. And I don't think that would have happened had I not had support and, I would say, nurturing. I would also say allyship. So it was really clear to me when I had the opportunity for those coming in behind me, regardless of who they were, regardless of gender or race or sexual orientation or age. I wanted to do what I could to also help them visualize where they wanted to be. It may not have been in our organization and may have been something else, doing something else, working in a different capacity. But I wanted to help them realize just, you know, that they had a lot to offer and how to develop those strengths. So I think that is when I felt like, and I didn't know it at the time, I felt like I wanted to be supportive of others and be an advocate of others. That was around the time too that I started my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Good.
Uh,
Did you ever think about, or do you ever, let's say, stimulate others to be allies and sponsors as well? Because you're doing this, because you had the experience and you're doing that as well. You're carrying that forward. Are you also talking, let's say, to other leaders and stimulating them to do the same?
Um, I would say at some point in time, yes. But in the beginning, no, not maybe naturally I did because I knew that support, mentorship was important. But I didn't understand just how important. So when that became more clear to me over time, yes, I did. I did. And how did I do that? One of the things that I worked really hard in our organization to do to develop employee resource groups. Employee resource groups, at the time they were called staff affinity groups, and then employee resource groups, and then business resource groups. They became more and more popular within organizations. But it was an opportunity in a way to bring like-minded people, people with similar backgrounds or cultures or interests together to share and support each other, to share and support each other in the workforce, but also in the community. So I had the opportunity of creating that in our region. It was not a new model within the organization I worked, but it was something we didn't have in our region, in our area of the business. So I supported that for African Americans, for Hispanics, and for the LGBTQ population. It's interesting, though, for the LGBTQ population at the time, I had a lot to learn. Even though I was using similar models and creating the other two and getting the voice out and bringing people together and really brainstorming on what issues they felt like they experienced and what they felt they needed for the community, for the work environment. It was a little different within the LGBTQ population, those with different sexual orientation, perhaps. And it was because I think I didn't know enough I hadn't listened enough. I had a lot to learn. And I was pushing the agenda that created a little bit of discomfort for them. And so what that taught me is one size does not fit all. You really have to listen, you really have to understand, and you really have to help open up the space, but not necessarily carry the torch.
Yeah.
So I learned that I needed to open up the space to allow people to walk through when and if and how they wanted to, but not necessarily carry the torch to lead them through.
Yeah.
And that was a big aha moment for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting learning indeed. Not every minority group is the same. Of course, you know that, but you don't realize when you start working. Okay. Arushi, did you have another question about this one?
Yes, one small one. So in the beginning, you mentioned that people who were kind of your allies and you found people in your corner, they sometimes opened up doors for you.
Can you turn your volume up? I've turned mine up, but I still have
Is
trouble
that
hearing you.
is that better?
A little better. I'll turn mine up a little bit more.
Okay. I'll just talk louder.
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, I'm coming closer also. So you mentioned that when you had kind of allies or sponsors and people in your corner, they opened up doors for you which you didn't even know needed to be opened up, or doors which you didn't know you needed to step into. So do you have like kind of a small example of that, or like a story which we can, add to the story like as a personal touch?
So for others or for myself?
For yourself, or if you did that for others, along the way as you realized you wanted to sort of play that role in the life of someone who went through the same experience. So either or both.
Um, I'm just thinking. I will say, I'll start with this and maybe it would lead me to your question. I remember the day that I talked to our executive medical director, and my conversation was about mentorship. I was asking for mentorship. I felt like I needed it. I felt like I wanted it, and I didn't have it. As a physician, you learn on the job training. See one, do one, teach one. That is how we were taught in medical school, in residency, and when you first come out to practice. So the mentorship and sponsorship and advocacy wasn't something that was very common in healthcare.
Mhm.
I think we're just now getting to a place where we recognize how important it is. Healthcare, I think, is behind the curve. So I remember the day when I asked for mentorship, and my executive medical director said, "You don't need that. You know what to do. And if you don't, you'll figure it out."
Mhm.
That was my journey, trying to figure it out until we had different leadership and a different perspective and a different mindset. As a result, I became the Associate Medical Director of Professional Development. And in that role, I had the opportunity to evaluate and assess our leaders at different roles within the organization, those who were just starting out, those who were in middle management, so to speak, roles, those who were in more advanced roles, and those on the senior executive team. And one of the things I had the opportunity to help create was a mentorship program. And we focused on the different levels, but it was such an area of interest for me because of my own experience and not having that and feeling like I not only wanted it, but needed it. So we started to offer mentorship opportunities for our physicians, and our administrative staff. Positions that I would say opportunities that would allow them to talk with leaders, to meet with them on a regular basis, usually about once a month over breakfast or lunch, in a small group setting or in a one-to-one setting. Part of it, of course, was to assimilate into the organization, have the time to ask questions, understand the culture, ask questions about why certain things were being done. But another part of it was to talk about growth, to talk about development, to talk about who they were, to talk about what they needed. And you saw that as you moved up into the levels of the organization. You saw that that became more and more obvious to people the higher they were within the leadership ranking. And so I felt, really good that as an organization, we had begun to take mentorship and coaching more seriously. That was one part of it. It wasn't the only part. Other parts were creating collaborations between groups of people who may share similarities, and create a network of people that could sort of lean on each other. It was our own form of, I guess you would say, the Facebook group, right? So we would look at, we used the software to help us identify, similarities so that we could offer group opportunities that you could join, whether you were women with small children working in the workforce, whether you were single women or single men who wanted to support each other with other single men who, whatever the likeness was within similarities within the group, we were trying to make opportunities for you to meet each other and share. So we worked on it within a social environment because we realized that that if you had a strong social environment at work, you would more likely feel comfortable in the job, and you would more likely have a higher job satisfaction, as well as stay longer. So that was a benefit for us as well as the person. It helped with your wellness, so to speak. And within the organization, it was an opportunity to grow, learn, and move forward if that's what you wanted as well.
Right. Okay, thank you for sharing that. I think it helped us kind of complete that story. I think we have enough input for this one. Anouk, do you agree?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. So then we can move on to number 2. So, Susan, you're a physician, you're an operational and executive leader. A
I
board
was.
or you have been slash are. So, and that has obviously given you a very broad perspective on many issues at hand. So how do you kind of use that unique perspective when you're working towards your next goal? Because you probably see things through all these different lenses, due to all the different experiences you've had and roles you've held. So how do you kind of use all of these? How do they come together to give you that unique perspective when you're or when you're going to your next role, or when you're in any kind of situation?
I think about the different aspects of whatever it is I am looking at, whether or not it gives me the I would say it helps me to expand my thinking. It helps me to expand from what's in it for me. What are my values, and are my values aligned with the work or the initiative or the position or the role? it helps me to do that because I've realized over time just how important that is. And that sometimes you have to be very intentional about your values, who you are, to ensure that it is aligned with what you're doing. Otherwise, that incongruent feeling will get in the way of your contributions, or maybe will interfere with the fact that you're not as successful as you would like to be. Sometimes you're not sure why and what's getting in the way. So being intentional about next steps, being intentional about aligning that with who I am, I just think that's important.
And do all the various sort of past roles, present roles, do they help you evaluate and look at each situation in a different way? So, like, just sort of all these parts of your mind, look at them separately and then all come together to kind of evaluate a situation like that?
It does help. It does help. I was speaking to someone yesterday about a potential role, and they found me on LinkedIn and wanted to know if I was interested or if I knew someone that was interested. In the conversation, it was really clear the kind of leader they were looking for, right? And having had the experiences I had, I could understand what it meant. There was a time when you just thought about, one, moving ahead, or two, this is a great opportunity, one that I could possibly bring value to. But it moved for me to what does the position need? What kind of person is needed? What are some of the strengths and values that are needed in this person for this position? And, you know, whether it's leadership, management skills, ability to communicate and collaborate more effectively, actual skills to do the job. Where there was a point in time when I thought if you had the skills to do the job, the technical experience, that was enough. I think I've learned over the years that it's so much bigger than that. And you don't have to be perfect at the job. You have to know enough and be willing to grow. And it's not about perfection, but it's about getting better every day. I think I bring that to the table now, where there was a point in time I did not do that. I would say one thing that we used to try to teach the females, the women in our organization, because we started, and we did this by starting a leadership program that ran before I left for 6 years, right? And we would get together, hundreds of female physicians getting together to talk about the role of physicians in healthcare, not just as a doctor, but other contributions. And it became so clear to everyone that men will step out there in a second. Men will feel like he is enough for the role, even if he doesn't have all the skill, even if he doesn't know how to do all the tasks. A man will just step out there, where women will feel the need to be 90% proficient with tasks, 90%, 80% proficient with leadership skills, have multiple titles, etc., before deciding to step out there. And so I think one of the journeys that I've been on too is trying to help myself as well as other women understand and know that you don't have to be perfect. You have to be good enough, and you have to be willing to get better.
I'm just thinking what else we might need for this question. Um, so let me share one example with you. We had another client who is an attorney and a coach and an engineer. And she said that these three sort of different sections in her mind would look at each situation. So the attorney in her came up with a certain solution or looked at things a certain way. The engineer in her looked at it in a different way and came up with solutions. And the coach in her sort of asked questions and dug deeper. So she talked about how it was like a triangle way of thinking, and that helped her look at each situation. So do you think you would kind of resonate with that? And does the same thing happen to you when you're approaching any situation? Given that you have these different mindsets which all come together to kind of evaluate a situation.
That's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that. And I would have to say, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think about things not just from my own experience and the things that I've learned along the way, but also who I am as an African-American woman.
Mhm.
So that comes into play as well.
Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to mind is I am a physician, and becoming a physician conditions you a certain way. It conditions you to push through and get the work done regardless, right? Being a physician requires, unfortunately, and we need to move away from this, requires having few excuses for why you cannot do something. If you decided, you've committed. And if you've committed, you're going to work hard. You will put everyone else first before yourself. We know that about healthcare workers, partly because that's who becomes a healthcare worker, partly because we're conditioned that way as a healthcare worker.
Mhm.
So one of the things we have to think about when you're a healthcare worker and you're thinking about my future expanding moving forward is, am I doing this because I want to do it? Or am I doing this because I haven't yet learned how to say no? Am I doing it because I want to serve others? I want to please everyone else. As a result of having that mindset and that conditioning, healthcare workers tend to burn out faster than some other industry workers. And part of that is because of putting everyone else first. So I've learned, and what I tell people is to really dig deep into their why. Why would you want to do this? Why would you want to take that move? Is it aligned with your values, your intention? Is it because you really have something to contribute? What are the real reasons? And to understand how it might impact you from a personal perspective. Are you walking into an environment where you are the only? And to understand what that will mean. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, of course not. But the extra energy that may be required to fit in, understanding whether or not you have allies. If it's only an all-male situation, where are your allies? How do you build them? What happens if that journey is harder than you think it will be? How do you find your voice? So I think from a perspective, there are so many things you have to think about when you are on your journey, when you are moving forward, when you are considering your career. And I think my experiences in leadership has taught me that, has taught me how to find my voice, even when, you're dealing with various aspects that are at the table. And I think it has also helped me to understand that mentorship, that support, not only having it regardless of where you are in the organization, but offering it to others, regardless of who they are, is so critically important.
Mhm.
Is that more aligned with an answer that makes sense to you?
Yes, yes. No, it all makes sense. I just like to think about how we're going to structure, the interview article. But yeah, that was like a great explanation of just how you approach situations and how you think about them. So thank you for sharing. And with that, I think we can move on to the third one. Okay, so this is a slightly long question. Bear with me, please. So, we talked about the staggering consequences of neglecting the needs of the clinical workforce. There is large scale resignation, not so great image of the medical profession for generations to come, and other factors leading to big issues of not having enough talented, motivated, and medical professionals to serve patients. So, attracting and retaining the clinical workforce is a huge issue. And this is a big responsibility which the current physicians have, and there's already a shortage of doctors, and that will only get worse, and it has gotten worse with COVID. So how does this trend kind of turn, and what are your opinions on it, or what are you doing for it, and how do we kind of reverse this cycle?
Thank you for asking that. I'm honestly really concerned. I'm concerned because we've been hearing about the upcoming healthcare shortage for years. I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago is when I first started to hear that in 2030, 2050, we will have a healthcare shortage. So part of the work at that time was, how do we put more people through medical school? How do we put more people through residency program? Do we have enough medical schools? Do we have enough residency programs in order to develop the pipeline? How do we increase our allies, our ancillary staff, nurses, other clinicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, in a way that they can support the work of physicians and DOs, et cetera. So there's been a lot of thinking around that over the years, and the number of nurse practitioners and PAs going into the workforce will help to solve the problem. At the same time this is going on, COVID has highlighted, it has actually put a spotlight on just how difficult working in the healthcare arena can be already. So prior to COVID, we had a problem. I think it was going unnoticed by others outside of healthcare. COVID has allowed others outside of healthcare to see the problem. And the problem, I believe, is that we do things the way we've always done them in healthcare. It hasn't changed. The industry has not changed its approach in many years. The margin in healthcare is very small. Hospitals deal with a very small margin. Large healthcare organizations have small margins. As a result, they're not willing to take bold moves for fear of impacting that small margin. In addition, taking bold moves will disrupt, the status quo. One of the things that has occurred in healthcare is that we have been so used to doing things the same way. You teach the same way, you learn the same way, you treat the patients similarly. Of course, new procedures come to light, new drugs are put out there, but the process of rolling that out, FDA approval, doing the research, then offering it to the population hasn't changed. But yet, many other things have changed. The payment models have changed. Insurance carriers have made adjustments. That has resulted in the need to see more patients in the same amount of time in order to compensate people appropriately or to maintain that small margin. That has put a lot of pressure on people caring. Nurses in hospitals will care for patients double the amount they did 20 years ago. Doctors see more patients. So you shorten your visit, you do less, you have patients come back more frequently. You do what you can to fit everything in the system. All of that adds to burnout, unfortunately, because it causes you to expend more energy. It causes you to work harder. You have less time for yourself. And then you pile all of that on top of the EMR and the pressure that the electronic medical record has placed on healthcare workers. Previously, you could get through a visit very quickly, writing your chart. Wasn't the most efficient way. The EMR has solved a lot of problems, but it has resulted in a huge administrative burden on the people using the EMR. And we didn't account for the fact that having scribes and other support for the use of EMR would be extremely helpful, but it wasn't built into the calculations of, of reimbursement. So as a result, people are working harder than they've ever worked before. They're emotionally drained because of the COVID situation. Compassion fatigue is occurring across the board. It is showing up in ways that it has never shown up before. You are not only feeling that, you're getting resistance from patients when you talk about COVID, especially patients who don't believe that's what they have, or patients who are not interested in getting the vaccine. And having that conversation over and over and over can be draining. So you pile all of that on to what previously has been going on. And I think we really have a burnout situation in healthcare that has to be addressed with a sense of urgency. What has driven me to want to be available as a coach for healthcare workers is the need to help them deal with some of what they're going through, come to terms with some of what's driving their burnout and lack of well-being, to help them identify areas in which they can rebuild or replenish their own energy bank account, to help them just really reassess and reevaluate how they want to move forward in this arena without stepping away from it. We have too many people who are stepping away from healthcare, and we can't afford that. We really need them to stay, to contribute, to work, but in a way that brings them the joy in medicine that they had when they first entered into the arena.
Are there any other specific efforts which the current healthcare community is taking or doing to kind of retain existing talent and attract new talent?
I think there are a lot of things going on. There are a lot of stem cell efforts, pipeline development efforts to get students from elementary school interested in healthcare. So there have always been things going on in that arena. I think more needs to occur.
Mm-hmm.
I think everything going on about healthcare and calling healthcare workers heroes, et cetera, has put a big light on it. And the result of that could be that young children may decide that's not what I want to do. We don't know what's going to happen with that. So the efforts of encouraging them to consider being a nurse, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a PA, et cetera, may require double time effort because the views that they're seeing right now may be influencing them in a negative way. So that's always been around. We can do more. Medical schools. I was really proud to be part of the development of the Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine, now called the Bernard Tyson School of Medicine, because we do need more opportunities for students who cannot afford medical school to matriculate into school. The price point has turned so many people off, even if there's a desire and aptitude to do the work. So I think that's a concern, and I think that's one that we need to look at in a very important way, in a solutions-driven way, to make it more affordable to become a doctor, a nurse, others.
Right. I think that's actually a good segue into the last and final question, because we're kind of talking about equity and how the patient, the physician, and the organization, they're all interconnected and they need each other to be successful, obviously. And in all three of these entities, there is a lot of inequity. And there is a need for equity, from pay gaps and unconscious bias. And we need to create kind of a more bias proof system, and that needs to be intentional and focused. So how are you kind of working towards implementing that bias proof system where, there's equal opportunity for all and equal healthcare for the patient?
That's a big question because it takes so much more than one person. That is not a one-person journey. That is a journey that we all need to be on, because it will take all of us to make a difference. Again, not many good things have occurred because of COVID, but one of the things that COVID has done is help to shed a light on health disparities. The IOC report that came out, I think it was 2001, told us that access to care was not the problem. Prior to that, we always felt access to care created the disparities. And if you had access to a good doctor or health insurance, you could have the same healthcare outcomes as anyone else. We know that is not the truth. We know that access is only a piece of the puzzle, but unconscious bias within the healthcare organizations, within the delivery of care, is a huge part of it. How do you address that? It requires a lot. Part of it is you have to build systems and have processes in place that automatically remove as much of the bias out of it. We all have biases. You can't get away from it. It is who we are. So you have to train individuals to understand what their biases are, to know when they show up. You can use data analytics to help evaluate where your biases show up. You can take the implicit bias test to better understand where your biases show up. But first, you have to want to do that. You can't just say, I'm not biased, and walk away. You are. So let's understand where they are, because wherever they are is where you aren't influencing people the way you should or would want to. Mm-hmm. It shows up in the one-on-one relationship with the doctor, the one-on-one relationship with the nurse, and how people are treated all the time. I'll give you one example because it is as prevalent today as it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Sickle cell patients. One, to be called a sickler. If you have sickle cell, people will say, people in the healthcare, area who are treating you will call you a sickler. That's not right. When you use the term sickler, you have a vision of what that is. You are oftentimes labeled as a drug seeker because you're looking for pain relief, because having a sickle cell crisis means you are in a lot of pain. So you're oftentimes labeled that way. You're oftentimes not provided the care in a timely manner that you need to have. You, as a result of your illness, will probably delay seeking care because you don't want to go through that whole scenario that you know will occur each and every time, regardless how many times you come in for a visit. Take cystic fibrosis, which is a disease that affects a different population of people more often. Treat it very differently, a lot more money going into research, a lot more compassion to the disease. So the bias is there. We need to address it. We need to train people. We need to continually talk about it. We need to put in systems that will remove as much of it as possible, just automatically. And we can't let up. Same thing for members of the trans population. It matters how you address a person who is a member of the trans community when they walk up to the desk for healthcare. It matters. It matters to them. It matters in how you build that relationship. You can't say, because I don't believe in that, it's against my religion, I am going to refuse to treat that person with the respect he or she deserves. You know, so there's a lot of work to be done.
Mhm.
And I won't even go into when English is your second language and you may have limited English proficiency and the impact that can have if you don't take the time to have interpreter services by phone or live or in some fashion in order to communicate more effectively with the patient.
Okay, well, I think we have enough input for that one. Nook, do you
No.
agree?
I do. I think these are such interesting topics. I mean, we talked about them before, so that's why let's say the intro, the question was relatively long because I got quite some of your input already. But I think they're really good, and I also think they really help us position you on that level where you're not thinking, let's say, in the nitty gritty, but you're really thinking on the high level, the oversight part, which of course, as a board director, is important. So I think it's really tackling, let's say, the issues that are there, like the inequity, but okay, look at it from a really high level, and okay, what does it take, or why do we need to change or to solve for these issues? So I think it's good. I think we have good input, and yeah, I really like the topics because they're really interesting, and they are different, because as you know, we work with several people from the Leverage Network. We have quite some people who work in healthcare, but this is your perspective, or your angle is different. So I like that. I like that a lot.
Mhm.
I will say that I spent a lot of my time working on health disparities because in Kaiser Permanente, it was one of our goals to decrease health disparities. So we did a lot of work in addressing limited English proficiency and looking at how populations of people were faring with their healthcare results, such as hypertensives in the African American population, colorectal cancer in the Hispanic population, etc., mammogram testing in various populations. But we also need to look at it from a health delivery standpoint, not just from a patient delivery standpoint. And what I mean by that is the individual healthcare provider and how it shows up for him or her and the impacts that he or she is experiencing that may play into all of it. And what I mean by that is if you're a woman orthopedic department and you're not feeling like you are part of the team, you will not provide likely the best care because of the impact that has on you. If you're the only African American and you're feeling dismissed and not included, it has an impact on how you show up for your patients. So even the bias, the unconscious bias that occurs in a workforce will have and result in an impact on how we care for our patients.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there are two ways to look at it.
Yeah.
That's the wellness part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
I know I felt like I was talking and talking and talking. It's like, I don't know if this is the right answer, right response. Maybe it's too long. Just, give
Yeah.
me the sign to shut up and we could start over. But
Yeah, no, I think this is good because I mean we have too much, but I will stop the recording as we